Welcome everybody to the Daily Struggle launch event. Very excited for everyone to be here today. Please feel free to introduce yourself with your name and local in the chat. And please remain muted if you're not speaking, just to keep the interruptions down. I am Nolan Tabb. I am today's MC. I'm a rank and file deer worker at Local 281, John Deere, Davenport, Iowa, and I'm also the co-chairperson of UAWD. Again, please feel free to share your name and where you're coming from in the chat. And we'll go ahead and start with some community guidelines for today. Before we get started with our program, I want to lay out some quick community guidelines for today's Daily Struggle launch event. We decided to hold today's event as an open Zoom call and not a closed webinar format to help our attendees from UAW and beyond gain a sense of who's a part of the broader class struggle movement and the ways in which we're interconnected. On that note, while not required, if you can, please have your video on. We'd love to see you all. All right. The format today will allow people to ask their own questions at the end of the event and use the chat freely. But in order to have the call be open and hold the packed program we've planned for you, we're asking everybody here to be respectful. Please stay muted unless you have been called on so as not to disrupt the program. And please use the chat sparingly while discussion is ongoing. Please don't carry on any detailed conversations in the chat while members are speaking, just to avoid distracting the speakers or other attendees. And also, any hateful, discriminatory, or intentionally disruptive speech or behavior will not be tolerated. If you violate these rules, you may be muted, and if it were to continue, you may be removed from the event. So with that, again, I am Nolan Tabb, rank and file deer worker at Level 281 and co-chairperson of UAWD. A little bit about me. So I came on scene while holding the line during the John Deere strike in 2021. And it was then that I was introduced to an entire world of labor activism and rank and file militant power being built around me. It lit a fire inside of me that burns even hotter today. I quickly joined UAWD, joined the fight for one member, one vote, and the subsequent Members United slate campaign that saw UAW members elect change for the first time ever. But after our victories, it was also starting to become very clear how insufficient the movement for simple sort of quote-unquote reform in our union could be. Our newly elected leaders led an impressive Big Three strike after decades of perpetuating service unionism and concessions, but still a campaign that was run from the top down, with significant holes in previous provisions relating to attendance, temp conversions, and that debate over the deal and how it framed sort of opened up a political divide in UAWD. And between a group of leaders seeking a more limited notion of reform and many of our core active members and leaders who believe that a militant democratic movement can only be built with a more political, expansive vision for class struggle unionism. After an unsuccessful attempt to undemocratically dissolve UAWD by those former leaders supporting reform, the leaders who attempted to dissolve left, and hundreds of UAWD members and supporters decided to keep building UAWD as a democratic membership organization composed of rank and file UAW members. We've spread across the country. We've anchored in UAW's main sectors, manufacturing, legal services, and higher ed, across shops big and small. So I'm excited and proud that our membership meeting in June, we emerged from this contentious period. The UAWD membership voted to adopt a new UAWD member platform to chart a class struggle course. As we say in our platform, we're standing on the shoulders of decades of class struggle fighters and drawing from the legacy of auto workers' militancy during the sit-down strikes in the 30s by the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in the late 60s. And our platform centers around 5 core values that UAWD will be built on: worker control, militancy, working class solidarity, democracy, and political independence. In the event today, you'll hear much more about how we plan to practice and feature those values, and you can check out the link to the platform in the chat to learn more. As we entered the summer, UAWD leaders and members knew that we had to continue to prioritize the work of UAWD organizing through the organizing committee and building up our movement from the bottom up, creating UAWD chapters, training and educating each other to become better. Apologies. We just led our first class struggle unionism 101 training for shop floor leaders last weekend, and you'll be hearing more soon about our public training later this year. And now our political journey brings us to today, the launch of Daily Struggle as a voice for class struggle by and for UAW members. to provide our rank and file workers a platform to express ourselves, to spread the vision of class struggle on the shop floor, even when it's opposed by a union bureaucracy. We knew we needed a vehicle for our ideas that could reach our coworkers where they're at. So our membership approved a charter for daily struggle that would prioritize not becoming just one more left publication, but a publication that would be distributed on the shop floor and provide UAW members with political education about class struggle unionism and the principles contained in the UAWD member platform. We knew we needed a publication that would unabashedly champion a rank and file led class struggle movement in the UAW to fight for the entire global working class against the business unionism prevalent in the bureaucratic leadership of American labor unions. In addition to our online publication, which will be updating with new articles weekly, our charter commits us to publishing a print edition quarterly that any UAW member will be able to request copies of for free to hand out at their gates and on their shop floors. Our strategy is to have our publication and our shop floor UAWD chapter building feed one another, with organizers being brought into publication. So that's the fight we lead, the class struggle ideas that drive them and amplify one another. We believe our approach can bring militants together and overcome the automation that makes organizing so challenging. So with that, before handing off to some of our more of our members leading shop floor struggles, I'll close with a few calls of action for the incredible group of UAW members and our class struggle allies here today. To be able to lead this effort and print thousands of copies of Daily Struggle and distribute it across the country, we need funds to make it possible. Later in the program, we'll have a fundraising pitch and ask you to contribute. So please think about it and check out our fundraising link in the chat. Also, please check out our dailystruggle.org. That's dailystruggle.org, which is live today, and please share it with your coworkers and network. Also, later in the program, we'll screen share and briefly show off that website. We're proud of it. So you can see what we've been working on and our initial release features 4 exciting articles. One is the introductory editorial by our editorial board, who you'll hear from later today. Introductions for them. That title is A Class Struggle Vision, Why UAWD is Launching Daily Struggle. You'll also find a graphic, quote, reviving the struggle for a shorter work week, that highlights the organizing and political education around work-life balance. A story from the trenches by 3 of our legal service leaders analyzing their incredible bottom-up sectoral strike in New York City earlier this year. And last but not least, an interview with 3 Lear Parts workers about their rank-and-file shop floor education campaign during their recent negotiations, paving the way for a unified UAW strategy in the parts sector. We also have a great group of exciting articles on the horizon that will include an analysis on how a class struggle union would struggle in solidarity with immigrants against the Trump administration, how a view from newly organizing rural manufacturing sectors about their challenges and their opportunities of a more political class struggle approach, and the challenges of urban versus rural manufacturing, and also an article commissioned by UAWD membership about the UAW's recent campaigns, reviewing their successes, their failures, their top-down nature, and how a bottom-up union would fight, and also so much more. And now to our launch event. We're going to kick things off by hearing from 3 incredible speakers about their organizing, leading UAWD from the bottom-up movements and the shop floors. Then after a brief screen share, we'll have a short panel with some of the UAWD members on our Daily Struggle editorial board, discussing what class struggle unionism means in our current political movement. And then after our fundraising pitch to you, we'll conclude with remarks from our guest speaker, Toni Gilpin, labor historian and author of The Long Deep Grudge, a story of big capital, radical labor, and class war in American heartland, about the historic role of a class struggle unionist approach and how our movement today ties into and how we can learn from shop floor militants from decades ago. We're expecting our program to run about 75 minutes. So after Toni speaks, folks here will be able to ask questions, and any of those speakers will share ideas and be a part of the discussion. So without further ado, first up, please let me introduce Gene Duchemin as our first speaker. Gene is a committed union reform leader, rank and file organizer, and an avid fighter when management oversteps. He currently serves as Committeeperson for the 2nd District at the GMCCA facility in Lansing, Michigan, and is Vice President of UAW Local 1753, while also serving as a trustee on the UAWD Steering Committee. Please welcome Gene Duchemin.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Like Nolan said, my name's Gene Duchemin, Committeeman 1753, also Vice President. To speak on class struggle as it relates to a committee standpoint, it's present every day, right? Because if we're talking about the power that comes from up, down to the shop floor, from the company, the one thing I understand as a committee person, management's not our friends, right? They are literally, especially in my place, they are literally an enemy to our jobs. They interfere, they create hostilities, they retaliate against everything. And then if we have a union, I don't want to say ass kisser, but a bootlicker, they might get a little bit of favor and stuff, but the second they stop looking them boots, they come crashing down, right? So when I took the job, we have a leadership that doesn't do their jobs. So that means if our chairperson's not working, our grievances aren't going through step two, are not even effective. So as a committee person in my place, we have to be creative to get around the grievance procedure, to get around the leadership, around the e-board, around management. So, if we don't get creative and we don't fight back, it is just a hostile work environment, right? And that abuse and that beating on us day out, day in and day out, that manipulation, that gaslighting that we hear all day long, it comes home with us and it destroys our families. It ruins us. It ruins our relationships. So when we decided to fight back in 1753, it's an ugly business, right? The supervisors want us to go faster. They want the productions to go higher. They want they just want to intimidate us and intimidate us and intimidate us. So me and my guys, we had to get creative. We had to utilize their own tools to combat against their behaviors. We had to utilize the aware hotline. We had to utilize the committee job because as a committee man, my job as an umbrella protects them legally. So we're able to utilize the group calls, right? And if we have a group call out there, we're able to one, stop the clock because this is all that matters to them, right? The money. Once we stop the clock, the production stops. Customers don't get their stuff, and then the management gets in trouble. On top of that, when there's a grievance with that group call, we also have to organize everybody in the plant to watch management, everything they do, and call that aware hotline and make those statements. And the importance of that and the importance for our creativity with that is it gives our grievance leverage. If we just put that piece of paper in their hand, it's going to go right down the channel and it's not going to be observed. So, in order for us to put power behind our grievances, we have to be hostile. We have to create the chaos. We have to fucking, stop the clock. And we have to utilize everything at our disposal. And I understand different plants are different, right? Everybody has a different setup. But especially when it comes to the big three, we all have aware hotlines. We all have certain things that we can see that could be used in the fight with our ability to use that aware hotline and with the group calls and with the organized chaos that we're able to put down. We've had up to date, we just had another one fired the other week. So we're up to 27 members of management fired. So if they want to attack our jobs, if they want to intimidate us, we are going to make their lives a living fucking hell. We're going to fight like it's because it is our livelihood. So it is a hostile fight that they're bringing to us, and we got to fight back and match it. The only difference between our fight and their fight for money, their fight for all that bullshit. Our fight's got to be clean. It's got to be honest because we are the ones with the integrity. We have the higher seat. Without us, they don't get a paycheck. Without us, nothing moves. And they've done such a phenomenal job at getting us to believe that we're worthless, we're fucking replaceable and everything, but we are contracted. There is no turnover. We come with the building. So, in order to protect our home, we have to be strategic and understand these guys are not our friends. And if the leadership is not doing our union leadership is not doing our jobs, they are just like them. Right? They got complacent, they want to do their thing, then they become the enemy. And we have to be strategic and eliminate all that away from our environment so we can flourish in solidarity. And the grievance procedure now is an opportunity to organize. Every safety grievance, every hostile grievance, every violation is always an opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. I've only got 5 minutes, so that's it. Thank you guys. I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Gene. Ladies and gentlemen, Gene Duchemin, the fire of UAW. Next up, I'd like to introduce Sophia Gurule. Sophia is a member of UAW Local 2325 and its chapter unit, the Bronx Defenders Union, BXD Union. Since 2017, she's worked as a public defender for criminalized and incarcerated working class people facing deportation. As a UAW member, Sophia helped unionize her workplace in 2020, participated in two bargaining committees, two contract action teams, and also served as executive leadership of her local and BXD union, while also serving the members of UAWD with her role on the steering committee. Please introduce Sophia Gurule.
Hi, y'all. And thanks, Nolan, for the introduction. Yeah, first of all, second everything that Jean just said. It's actually amazing. One of the things that I really value about UAWD is being able to learn across industry, across roles, across the country, how different unionized workers are fighting back, fighting against our bosses, because, oftentimes people think that certain industries or certain types of work doesn't qualify as work. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if your livelihood, if your healthcare depends on these people giving it to you, we're all part of the working class, and we're all fighting not only for, in the context of my local, which is the Association of Legal Advocates and Attorneys, not only we fighting to defend working class people facing whether it's eviction or prosecution or incarceration or family separation or deportation. We fight as hard as we do for our clients as we do for ourselves, because we know that the legal systems that we operate in actually don't want us to be there. They don't want poor and working class people to have the tools at their disposal to fight this type of state interference. That's why we see so many efforts to try to erode and eradicate due process for poor and working class people. And what I'm really proud of in our local in particular is that we do have a really strong rank and file movement within the entire local. We were, I would argue, some of the first locals in the UAW to really be fighting for the UAW and for U.S. labor more broadly to intervene in the U.S.-backed Israeli genocide in Palestine. We did that when it was incredibly unpopular. Specifically, my shop at the Bronx Defenders did a statement in October 2023 that led to the mayor of New York condemning us, led to the New York Post condemning us, led to a number of people within the ruling class trying to silence us. And we even got a congressional investigation simply because we did a Democratic vote about a statement. So we have been fighting fascism within our local, not only in terms of the work that we do every day, because we see how the state will dispose of poor and working class people as quickly as possible. Again, whether it's through kicking them out of their homes or separating them from their families or locking them up in cages. But also there appears to be a lot of fear of organized workers coming together and fighting together, not only for ourselves, not only for our communities, but for workers worldwide. And I'm personally very proud of being part of that rank and file led movement, of being part of things like UAW Labor for Palestine, of UAWD, because again, this is where we learn how to fight back and to know that there are workers within the UAW who are using every grievance, every kind of confrontation with our employers to push back and to build worker power is something that I'm personally very excited to constantly be learning from, because to me, I still feel very new to the labor movement. I came, from immigrant justice background. I'm an immigration attorney. I came from, PIC abolition, the abolition of the prison industrial complex, but it's really this labor movement and the UAW where I've been able to see how when workers come together, when we listen to one another, when we actually engage in real democracy with one another, we have the capacity to change not only our own working conditions, but the working conditions for people worldwide. So I'm just really happy to be here. I know I only have a minute, and I will pass it to you, Nolan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Sophia has many, many fans around labor movement, and for obvious reasons. So, last but not least, the final of our three intro speakers, we have Rob Lett, one of Daily Struggle's editorial board members and a rank and file organizer at the Mercedes plant in Vance, Alabama. Rob is a member of the VOC for Future Local 112, experience from the perspectives of a supplier, a temp, and a full-time employee. Rob believes working class people need to come together to make real changes. Publications like Daily Struggle can be a focal point in bridging gaps and making our voices heard. Please let me introduce Rob Lett.
All right, appreciate it, Nolan. I'm Rob Lett. I'm one of the VOC members at Mercedes in Alabama. And one of the things I really wanted to touch on is just how much that my coworkers have been dealing with in roughly the last year or so. since we had our election. We've had a lot of issues with management trying to crack down on pretty much everyone, not just VOC members. One of uh one of the leaders of our campaign last year, Jeremy Kimbrell, was fired, and Jacobin actually did an article on him in the last few days. If you want to go look that up, Jeremy's a great guy, and he's still helping us out when he has the opportunity to, because that's just the kind of guy that he is. But it's been more than just that. They know that the rest of us have 10 toes on the ground, that we're not going anywhere. That's on the VOC. So their strategy has been to essentially say we're coming after everybody who, might support the union, but they don't have the guts to try to be open with it, or to try to put their name to it. So we've seen all kinds of issues, from them cracking down on people who have FMLA from doing drug testing, to recently we found out that all the temps in the shop are going to be gone on October 30th, like right before the holidays. And they're claiming that it's, because of economic issues, but we're still meeting most targets each quarter. Not all of them, obviously, because there are legitimate economic issues, but this is essentially just ways of them trying to instill fear in people. This is ways of them trying to make people think that, if you step out of line, or if you're not a company man, so to speak, there are going to be consequences. And essentially, what we're trying to do as a VOC is try to get people to understand that the fight just isn't against the company. The fight is against nihilism, in the form of, even if the union wins, nothing's going to actually change. We're still going to have the same problems. We're still going to have the same issues. And it's going to be a new face, but the same thing we've always been dealing with. And also fighting just the apathy that some people have. The idea of, one way or another, I'm not really invested. This is just a job for me. If something goes sideways here, or if I get frustrated with the way the management's treating me, I'll just find something else. The same kind of people that, have the mentality of, well, they would never do that to me. If the company tried to, move me to another shop that I wasn't familiar with, I would just, I would go to HR, I would do X, Y, and Z, and they won't do that to me. And then when those people actually do run to the issue, they're either just forced to tail between their legs, or they just get their ego bruised and they leave. And what we're trying to do is get people to understand that, you do have a voice. You aren't alone in this. And that's really the idea and the purpose of something like the Daily Struggle, is to give a platform to keep workers engaged, to give them a platform to let them know that, what they're seeing, what they're dealing with is not just some little isolated incident, and that there are ways, there are solutions to fighting back and to keeping things not just on the even keel, but to make things better. To show that what you're seeing isn't something that you just have to deal with or you have to take. You have the ability to make your life and the life of people around you better. And it's not, some Herculean task. It's not something that you have to, move mountains to achieve. It's something, really, the only thing you have to do is just stick together. And that's one of the things that, my members of the VOC have just been trying to instill in people. And I know that in forums like this, I might be like viewed as, uh, my view is just, as a representative of it, which I am, but there are so many more people than me that are trying to make this thing happen. And an arc I've been working on with Nolan, who you just heard from, is essentially trying to put a spotlight on the tactics that companies use when you're dealing with a facility that's in a rural area, because a lot of the people that work there don't have a plethora of options. A lot of people that work there, this is the best job they're going to have within, a few hour radius. So, point of something like Daily Struggle is to put a spotlight on these issues and let everybody know, not just in the the auto industry, but in industries across, or industries in general, that this is what we're all dealing with, and we have a way to fight back, and we have a way to make our voices heard. So, I know I only got 5 minutes. That's all I wanted to say, and I'll kick it back to you, Nolan.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you to all of our intro speakers, Gene, Sophia, and Rob. And with that, I'll hand things over to my UAWD co-chair, Andrew Bergman. Andrew.
Hey all, my name's Andrew Bergman. I, along with Nolan, am a co-chair of UAWD. So grateful to get to be here with so many wonderful members of UAWD and supporters. I'm a rank and file worker at an assembly plant in Detroit called Detroit Hamtramck General Motors facility. We make the electric Hummer, which is one of the stupidest vehicles around. And actually, it's the reason that we just had a last minute mass layoff, which, just speaks to the ways in which bosses take control of everything. And I'm also, been a member of UAWD for a long time. Before being an auto worker, in the last 2 years, I was a rank and file graduate student worker coming out of higher ed, and I spent years in the UAW in that world before this. And so grateful to be here. Honestly, the work going into Daily Struggle has been going on for such a good long time. It's just kind of exciting to be able to launch it here with you all. And to kind of get into that before we go to this great panel that we have planned, where 3 of our editorial board members are going to kind of get to show off the thinking and the sort of work that's gone into Daily Struggle and why we're so excited to pitch it. But before that, I want to show you the actual website itself for just a few minutes, because there's a whole bunch of work that's gone on to just the physical layout. And it's really beautiful. So I'm gonna screen share it. Let me get it up. And folks, please let me know if there's anything wrong with the screen share. Hopefully you can see it. And I'm starting here with the Who We Are page, because I just want to feature the work that's gone into this. So we have this great editorial board. I'm not going to be able to introduce them each in detail. 3 of them are about to be on our panel, but I'm just going to say everyone's name because I'm so grateful for the work they put in. Jean Bay, myself, Chuck Gelman, Martha Grevatt, Belinda Gortari, Rob Lett, Nevin Aplipovic Schwengler, Ali Stanton, Noah Stuckey, Nolan Tabb, and Judy Raitt. 12 folks put a lot of work into building out a vision that came from the UAWD membership. As Nolan said, this isn't something that just the 12 of us decided we'd do. There's a charter to launch this, to sort of put in place its purpose that everyone talked about, to build this class struggle vision and to connect it to our shop floor organizing. And that's why we built this. And we've gotten so much support from other members. Gene, myself, Chuck, and Noah have been the co-chairs kind of in our few months of launch. I really want to give a big shout out to Nevina and Ali, who designed this website, this really beautiful logo that's at the top, the layout of everything here. I got an education on how hard it is to actually build one of these things, and they put in so much work into making it happen. And then last, hopefully someone else will drop these in the chat, but I want to just, draw you all to actually following us on Instagram and Twitter and giving our Facebook page a like. I know that's something everyone says. We're not going to be we're not doing this for social media, as Nolan said. We're doing this to actually be able to do these distributions on the shop floor. But we do hope that folks will see us on social media as well. And so quickly, before I go to the panel, let me just take you to the homepage, where you can see sort of our featured articles in this initial release. the editorial that the 12 of us put together on this class struggle vision and why we're launching Daily Struggle. This great article that Sophia and Navruz and Jeremy worked on their incredible sort of legal services strike. And then our two other articles here on the graphic on reviving struggle for a shorter work week, and this great interview done with members of Local 1819 Lear parts workers on tackling this huge tier in the auto sector, the parts tier. Let me just make sure you know that you can go to our subscribe page. Hopefully someone will just go drop that in the chat as well so that you can actually get Daily Struggle in your inbox. We really want to welcome people to do that. And if you are a UAW member, of course, feel free to just DM us, but it'd be great if you also come here and click this button that you're a UAW member and wants a stack of Daily Struggle. And again, that's something we're going to give out for people for free to be able to bring to their shop, to their gates and hand it out. And that's, kind of the big way we want to actually get out the word about our class struggle movement through Daily Struggle. And the last thing I want to call people's attention to is just that you can write for us. And again, this is sort of, we're a publication for members and by members. So UAW members who are here are welcome to suggest a submission. And you can do it here. There's a form you can click to actually get it. Of course, again, feel free to DM us if you're interested. You have, we can share our phone numbers, and you can actually talk to us directly. But we also, want to make sure you know how to do it this way. And yeah, I'll end with the about page. If you want more background on why we're doing this, to read our charter, to learn about our editorial board, please feel free to check it out. You've heard most of it today from Nolan, but we want you to have a look. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully someone drops some links in chat. If not, they're there. That's great. Okay, so with that, I want to move on to this panel discussion that we have set up for you. And yeah, I will quickly introduce the three panelists. So each of these are members, as I mentioned, of the editorial board that I've been working with closely, and I'm so grateful to introduce. Noah Stuckey is a worker at the Mazda-Toyota manufacturing facility in Huntsville, Alabama, and began organizing at his plant with the UAW following the 2023 stand-up strike. He's a leader of their organizing committee, building a union at that plant. Julian de Gortari is a member of UAW Local 4811 and a graduate student worker at UCLA. Julian is part of the rank and file movement that has been built up as an alternative militant approach to the bureaucratic UAW leadership across the University of California. And Julian's also a leader in the solidarity movement with Mexican auto workers fighting to build independent democratic unions. And finally, Martha Grevatt is a retired member of UAW Local 869, which represents workers at Stellantis in Warren, Michigan, at the stamping plant there. She's a member of the UAWD steering committee. She is a founding member of Pride at Work and a managing editor of Workers' World newspaper. And on a personal note, I just want to say I've served with Martha on the UAWD steering committee for, I think, almost 5 years. I don't know if you know that, Martha, but I tried to count it. And she's finally stepping down to focus on these other organizing projects she does, although she is going to continue her work on the editorial board with us, which will be necessary because of everything she's done. And so, yeah, I'm honored to just get to ask her some questions today along, of course, with Noah and Julian, you too. Okay, so with that, I'll just get to the prompt, and then we're going to have, I think, 20-ish minutes for discussion. And I've got a couple prompts, and my hope is that I just give the one, and these three are going to kind of just get talking. So the sort of high-level question is, we're talking about class struggle unionism. So when we say this, what do we mean? What is the role of a union in class struggle? And we kind of take for granted that it should have one, but what do we actually mean by that? And I just want to sort of hit a couple points before passing it off to Martha to get us started. We spent a lot of time building this platform, which I really encourage people to read and kind of get into the weeds of. And it's like tens of people that built this. We took weeks to make sure we felt good about it and pass it democratically. And it centers on 5 core values that UAWD are building on and Daily Struggle will be built on: worker control, militancy, working class solidarity, democracy, and political independence. And so when we say, we're looking to build a class struggle union, we're also wondering, why are unions not where we need them to be at this time in this country. And what do we need to transform about our unions and the politics of our unions to achieve that? And I think that the answers are built into these 5 things, although it's also, we should note, we're not going to hear the answer to this question today. I've talked to all 3 of them. They don't have the answer. If we knew the answer, we'd do it, we'd be done. But there's a lot we know that's wrong and a lot we can improve on. And there's just 2 of these that I want to point out, and then I think the 3 of them will go into it in a lot of detail. Working class solidarity, we say that a lot, but what do we mean? We certainly don't just mean like signing letters, calling for things. We mean something deeper about how we engage in our shops and our communities with temps, with workers across borders, but it's complicated. So how do we actually pull that off? And then another one that we often gloss over, we think of these things like democracy, but we don't talk as much about worker control. We don't talk about the idea that we actually are divided and exploited on the basis of these pay tiers, mandatory overtime, these like surprise layoffs that people in my shop are experiencing, or even these small things like the line times at your plant just being changed last minute. So when workers actually have more capacity to control their shops and their lives, they also have ability to build solidarity and actually practice that democracy. So there are these things that are different about this vision, and I'm going to kick it to Martha to sort of open us up as to how we actually think about what this class struggle union might mean.
Well, class struggle is 2 words. Both of those 2 words are extremely important. The first word is class. We need to understand what class is. If you're a member of a class, you have a particular relationship to the process of production, and you're in a political certain place in society. And right now we're living under the capitalist system. There are basically 2 classes: the working class, which is all of us, which is the vast majority, which make everything run. As a previous speaker said, we produce everything. We produce enough product to cover our wages, but then we go over and beyond that, and we produce profit for the capitalist class who does no work, who are the rich, the capitalists, or call them the ruling class, or the bourgeoisie, or the 1%, or the billionaires, whatever. They don't they don't contribute anything, but they have a disproportionate share of the wealth that we produce. This, there used to be, it used to be even worse in the union and in our union, all this talk about, the middle class, the forgotten middle class, save the middle class. Well, most people in society are not members of any mythical or actual middle class. They're either in the capitalist class, or the majority are in the working class. And we need to talk about us as the working class and build global solidarity of the working class. And the second word is struggle, meaning as a class, we have to engage in struggle. We can't get anywhere by trying to build some mythical partnership with the bosses. No, we've got to struggle against them for everything we get and struggle to keep it. But we need to understand that class struggle is not just something we do in our plants to further our own narrow interest, but it's a global class struggle, and there's one global working class. And so I still say workers and oppressed people of the world unite. Now I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Martha. Really appreciate that. Incredible as always. And hand it over to Julian to give us his answer.
Yeah. I think Martha gave a really good explanation of what is class struggle. And at the end, she was telling how this class struggle should be global, no? And I think when we understand class as a system where there are 2 classes, one that are the actual producers of things, and one that is the owner of the means of production, but doesn't actually do anything for society, just rips out whatever the workers do. I think we tend to think of it as nationally, but actually this capitalist class is international. No, I guess in your plants, you may see how all these international supply chains, are integrated, and how the work you do is part of some work that was done in some other part. I guess that said, the workers' movement is not international, no, and that's a big problem. When we should be striving for that, but what happens instead? Some companies have plants in many countries, like General Motors have plants in the U.S. and in Mexico. But what happens in Mexico, unfortunately, for historical reasons, workers have not been able to achieve the same living conditions as the U.S. No, again, many historical reasons of oppression. No? And what happens? Instead of the workers' movement trying to expand, actively to incorporate these workers, it hears the lies of the capitalists that says, no, you are competing with those workers. Those are your competition, and they are just funneling all the money into that places where they have lower working conditions because it's their fault. No, it's their fault. They have lower living conditions. It's not the fault of the capitalists. No, so they create this competitive mind in workers that is what we should be destroying. We should be collaborating. And just to be a little bit more concretely, with respect to UAW, no, that is embracing this policy on tariffs that is making us look inward when we should be having a union that is international. UAW is international by definition, but what's happening? It's starting to engage in this game with Trump, believing its lies that these tariffs are benefiting the workers. No, when again Trump is surrounded by capitalists, by rich people. Why would they care about the workers in the U.S.? Why would they care about any workers anywhere? No, that is why the fundamental task of UAW is to start thinking of Mexican workers as if they were their own, as if they were workers also of UAW, because that's what happens in reality. No, again, we work by the same companies. We're just separated by borders, but in one country they are getting paid less, even if it's the same work. No, it doesn't make sense. And again, the task is to expand the union and not be stopped only by this very cosmetic solidarity displays where the union only sends statements. No, it should be a rank and file led international movement where rank and file can interact with each other to create these links, this empathy that is needed to actually fight together against our common enemy, which is the capitalist class.
Thanks, Julian. And yeah, it's such an important example that, even Sean Fain actually called in a statement for the idea of a wage floor for Mexican workers. But it's one thing to say that in a statement and then support tariffs. And it's another thing to meaningfully actually start educating and organizing around that being something in the big three contracts. Nobody thinks about that at my shop, but we could. Okay, thank you so much for those examples and that analysis, Julian. And now I'm going to hand it over to Noah to give us the view from his shop.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And Julian and Martha did a great job of introducing this idea of class struggle and what that looks like on an international scale. And I'm going to talk a little bit what that looks like on the ground for me where I'm at. So I'm organizing in a place that I think could be very vital for the future of the U.S. and international labor movement. We're in the South, a place which has, I'm organizing at Mazda-Toyota in Huntsville, Alabama. We're in the South. We're in a place which has never been heavily unionized. We have, what some of us call the Alabama discount, where we're able to be paid less than other workers because we don't have that unionization. And so while we don't get it to the same degree as the hyper-exploited, people in more underdeveloped countries, we are still a place where companies can flee to right now, so they don't have to pay those higher wages to the other workers, and it undermines the power of the labor movement. And so since we're building this from the ground up, we have to think about what this looks like on the ground level, what it actually looks like to try to get people into this class struggle vision. Because, a lot of times the approach is on a new campaign, we want to get cards, we want to vote, we want to get this legal body, union, to be present. But while that's necessary, while that's an important part of, making sure we can begin to get some of the rights that we're owed, at the same time, it's not enough. It's not enough, as Rob was talking about, also working on a campaign in Alabama, that once you have the union, if you don't have the core group of people, the rank and file, prepared to stand up and struggle, at the end of the day, it's just another legal fiction. And so when we look at this, how do we build this sort of class struggle vision on the ground floor? I think there's sort of two major things I want to focus on. One, we have to be exemplars of struggle in our daily lives on the plant floor. And at the same time, we have to be willing to show in practical ways our solidarity with workers who are more exploited than we are. So first off, there's a story some people here might be bored of, but I like to talk about. That I have a friend on the line. He's evangelical to the bone, believes in the rapture. We don't agree with, on a lot politically. But he sees, I'm willing to get people organized. I'm willing to try to get there's very small things like, we'll get fans on the line because I'll, get people to, just bitch about it. Come up to the boss and say, hey, it's hot as fuck over here. We need fans. And seeing things like that, again, we might not broach a lot of topics. We might avoid some things, but he is fully gung-ho for the union. He loves talking about it. He loves talking about this sort of worker control and all these sorts of things. Now, the second thing that I think is vital to building something that will have long-term power, won't just have this sort of legalistic partnership as we talk about with management, is organizing the other exploited workers. So at our plant, probably nearly half of the workers are contractors. They can be paid as much as $10 an hour less than us. They are in large part immigrant workers or from very impoverished communities. And now in a typical organizing campaign, they might not necessarily be seen as important to it because they can't vote. They will not have a say in whether or not we get the union authorized by the NLRB. But if we want to have something that can actually meaningfully change the condition of the entire working class, we need those people as well. And we not just because they're being treated like shit, because just in the same way that we are used against workers in Michigan or in the Northeast, they can be used as this reserve army of labor on us. And so it's difficult right now for a lot of reasons. Most obviously the terroristic actions of an organization like ICE, that people are very unwilling to speak up and fight out for obvious reasons. They're putting a lot more risk on the line doing so than a lot of us workers who work for Mazda-Toyota directly. But I think one of the most important things for changing that is to get the workers that are in a slightly better position to see their solidarity, like Julian was talking about. And the way you do that is by showing them, hey, when they want to fuck you, they're going to lean on these people. And I just wanted to give that sort of more practical idea of what it looks like on the ground floor. Thank you, Andrew.
Martha, Julian, if you have anything you want to say.
Well, I think Noah touched on a very important point that falls under the umbrella of solidarity, and that is that we need to be in solidarity with all workers, whether they're from another country but working side by side with us in this country, or whether they're in some other country in the global south, Latin America, or Palestine or Africa or wherever. They are all our class siblings, and we all need to find a way to unite. And unions need to be more integrated in the fight against these attacks by ICE against undocumented workers and workers who are here legally, but who are, of the same nationality as or the same, have the same appearance as people who are undocumented. And these ICE raids are just horrendous. They're a horrendous attack on the whole working class. This anti-immigrant hysteria is another tool in the arsenal of the ruling class to keep us divided, to play the old game of divide and conquer. And we need to reject that strategy 1000%. So I'm glad you brought that up, Noah. That was great.
Martha, I wanted to ask you, you have, a wealth of experience, and you gave your sort of broad outline of what you see in the abstract class struggle as being, but I wanted to see if you had any stories you wanted to share about more specific examples on that.
Well, I'll try to keep it short so that you and Julian can say a few words too. I don't want to monopolize what little time we have left. But you know, I worked almost 23 years at a what's now Stellantis. It was Chrysler stamping plant in Ohio, and then that plant closed during the bankruptcy. I followed my job to Detroit, and that's where I retired from, although I live in Ohio again. And I learned a lot during my 31 years in the plants. And and one thing is that not all workers have think a lot even about even about me as an individual. For example, when I ran for union office a few years ago, they get into arguments. Some would say, well, she's too radical, and others would counter, well, but that's what we need. We need to convince the whole working class that we need this fighting approach, and that there's no such thing as being too radical when you're for the working class and against the dominant, the ruling class, because we need radical just means getting to the root of the problem, and the root of the problem is this economic system that we're living under. So we need more radicals like us, playing more of a role in the movement of workers. That's what my experience has taught me.
Thank you, Martha. You want to go for it, Julian?
Yeah, I would just like to add just another point. That is that sometimes we think about solidarity with other countries, with workers in other countries, which obviously we have to support. But I think when we talk about the local, no, and I'm talking about my experience here at UCLA, where we have UAW 4811, we have ASME, we have other unions, no. But what happens is that the leadership only usually cares about our own union, when again there are workers in UCLA corresponding to other different unions, and it's kind of dumb to be only think of our own interests instead of uniting all the workers, even if we have different unions, to fight against the common enemy, which is our university administration. No? It just doesn't make sense. And I think solidarity stands first with understanding that it's not only about our workplace, but even some workers that are from an adjacent workplace. No, again, as a researcher, I work in my lab, but AFME workers are working outside. No, like it doesn't make sense to not be in solidarity and not trying to foment these rank and file links between all unions and even with non-union workers. No, that's what I would think is to consider a class struggle perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. I totally agree. Noah, if you want to go, and then if anyone else wants to make any final comments, and then I'll say a couple things before we wrap up.
Yeah, just to Julian's point, in my experience working, trying to organize a new plant, you don't just see that between unions. Within the UAW itself, there will be literally, this is an insane example to me. We had a organizing campaign in Huntsville, in the city I'm in, at Navistar Trucks, that one of the members of our VOC found out about on social media. Our organizers never told us about it. And then when we were trying to get them to get in contact with them, they, kept giving us, this, they're busy. They don't want to, literally, I was just asking, I want to just let them know we're backing them. We're on their side. And even that level of communication, they were putting up all these barriers to, and we're never giving a really clear explanation of why. And yeah, just to Julian's point, how are we going to build this movement that actually has this energy of people feeling like they're together in this movement when even within your own union, people have these little feudal fiefdoms that they sort of jealously guard. And that's the only point I wanted to make to that. Just very briefly to talk about connecting this broader international thing. I also think about the with talking about tariffs and this, how do we begin to build a way to have this international solidarity? When we think about trade policy, why aren't we demanding that workers in other countries get paid fair wages if we're going to trade with them? That should be, to me, a very obvious thing of the labor movement, because the biggest, most obvious thing that has happened in the past 50 years is jobs being shipped to people who can be better exploited. And I've heard organizers within the UAW, or I've heard stories of organizers within UAW say things like, well, the tariffs are good because we shouldn't do it on textiles or things like that, because that's not American jobs. That's not jobs Americans should be doing. And it's just, no union representative should ever be saying anything like that. There's no such thing as an American job or a Chinese job or a Nigerian job. Until we are willing to say no, we have to. We're cutting our own base out when we do things like that. And that's just the only point I wanted to make. And I'll let y'all wrap it up.
Thank you. No, that was really amazing. Before I wrap up, Martha, is there anything you wanted to say to close this?
Just like I closed my first comment, workers and oppressed people of the world unite. And add, you have nothing to lose but your chains. That is still true. So let's do it.
Thank you, Martha. That's fantastic ending the panel. I was just to tie together a couple of things before I pass it off back to Nolan. I want to go back to our intro editorial, which we all worked on, and so many of the themes that these three wonderful people just discussed are in here, and specifically this idea that we're atomized, that even in places like Nolan and Julian's context, people are standing 100 feet away from someone, but they're not organizing with them. And in fact, it is unfortunately a reality of our bureaucratic unions that there's an incentive model baked in that staff and leaders don't want to do that because it's harder, right? And if it's harder, you're less likely to win that contract campaign. You're less likely to get those cards signed. And unfortunately, those are the ills of our more bureaucratic top-down unions that we need to fight. And we need to actually build bottom-up class struggle unions, not just because it's obvious in the way that all of these, wonderful panelists said, but because it only is the only thing that reaches our long-term goals. We actually can't build a fighting workers movement if we don't have those connections. So I'll just read a couple sentences from our editorial, which I just dropped in the chat. Near the end, we say, what's needed now is to advance from isolated examples of working class militancy to combating the entire system that generates immense wealth for the few by exploiting the labor of the many. And then at the very end, we say, nothing happens in isolation. We must recognize the broader picture and develop a unified strategy. This is a necessary step away from exhausting our energies in endless uphill battles in a system that's set up for us to lose. We have to be taking on that system as a collective working class and fight to win. So it's hard, it's brutal, but we actually have to do it. And militancy, solidarity, worker control, they tie into that. With that, I'm very grateful to Martha, Julian, and Noah, and thank you all for being here. And as folks are saying in the chat, Toni Gilpin is going to be speaking briefly, but I'm going to hand it back to Nolan first for us to do a brief fundraising pitch, and then we'll close up with Toni. Sorry, we're running a little bit over, but we're nearing the end now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for all our panelist speakers. As Andrew said, we will be hearing from our guest speaker, Toni Gilpin. But first, I want to talk about how Daily Struggle is a political education project to bridge the gap across our entire UAW membership, but we can't do it alone. We need folks who believe in this to help us meet the financial support goals to get the Daily Struggle print to our shop floors. With that, I'll ask Martha Grevatt one more time to come and say a few words and walk us through the fundraiser portion of today's Daily Struggle launch event.
Too late. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Martha. And thank you, everyone who has donated. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. There's been many of us who have put in the time and efforts and the intelligence it took to get this and the militance it took to get this. But to get it to the shop floors, this is where it's been critical. So thank you so much for helping us make this happen. With that, without further ado, to give a proper introduction to our guest speaker, please introduce Andrew Bergman.
Hi. So don't want to let you have to wait too much longer for Toni, who's our guest speaker, but really just want to give a quick intro for her. Sorry, we're running over about 10 or 15 minutes, but hopefully folks can stay because Toni's very exciting to hear from. And I can say that not just because I've gotten to speak with her individually several times, but we had this really exciting moment when we were over the summer trying to build up an understanding of what UAW needed to be to actually commit to these kind of notions of democracy that we'd been talking about, but we didn't really know what the vision of class struggle should look like. And Toni joined us for kind of an internal town hall to teach us about the history of the farm equipment workers and this kind of militant commitment to class struggle they had. And I think for many of us, myself included, it really opened up our eyes to how what we were saying was actually not new at all. And it was something that was based in a long heritage. And that was just very exciting, I think, to know we were standing on shoulders and not doing things kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So with that, Toni Gilpin, I think many folks here know, is a labor historian and an author of The Long Deep Grudge, a story of big capital, radical labor, and class war in the American heartland. And I'll just leave it there. Thank you so much, Toni.
Thank you, Andrew. This is terrific and really exciting how many folks are here. The breadth of, geography and workplaces and age groups and ethnicities, racial, everything. It's really exciting to see this kind of energy and enthusiasm for this, I think, really important movement within the UAW. So I applaud you all for doing this, for putting in the work, and many of you the financial commitment, and that's a big deal. So you should give your all. I give you all a hand. And I know that it's late. It's Sunday afternoon, and so I don't want to, go on for too long. But so what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit, and then for folks who want to stay around and chat, that we can do that for as long as you like. And also, I'm thinking about the fundraising. One thing that maybe I'll talk to Andrew and Nolan about is maybe possibly making my book, The Long Deep Grudge, which deals with the history of the left-wing Communist Party influenced Farm Equipment Workers Union and its long struggle with the Titanic International Harvester Corporation. That maybe I could make that book some kind of pledge premium for folks who donate, for people who don't have it, because there's a lot of UAW history in that book, because the FE ultimately had this long rivalry and dispute with the UAW in the 1940s and 50s, was ultimately absorbed by the UAW in 1955. And my father was leader of the FE. I grew up in a UAW household, so I'm really, the UAW is in my heart all the time. So it's great to see this kind of UAW activism. Yeah, pledge premium book. We'll work that out. We'll figure out how to do that and make that possible. And I did talk to some of you about that book before, so I'm going to take a slightly different tack. I'm going to talk a couple things in the book that I think are relevant to what you're doing. Last weekend, I was actually at a conference of academics and some labor leaders where it was a small group, and we were really trying to grapple with the ways in which labor history can be relevant to folks who are on the front lines of organizing. There were some people from Chicago Teachers Union there. There were people from Starbucks Workers United, Amazon Workers No UAW leaders there that I knew of. But one of the things that what I was asked to talk about was the history of organizing, how organizing and its history can be relevant to folks who are doing current organizing. And I had to think about that and the history that I've done and the history in both the UAW and the Farm Equipment Workers Union. And what I decided to focus on or talk about was, there are many things in organizing that you all do all the time. I was, struck by what you were saying, what especially about the shop floor and the necessity for ongoing organizing, the committee building, the communications, this kind of publication that you're doing is essential to organizing. That's always been true. But the thing that I think we're also, thinking and speaking similarly is my view from the history that I've studied that organizing that effectively builds durable class consciousness requires a strong sense of historical memory, but also a political understanding of class struggle. And that's what you all are sort of, I think, working on it. By that I don't mean just an instinctive sense of class struggle or just sort of an us versus them kind of language, but an understanding of how capitalist exploitation works, an understanding that vests activists with a recognition of where power is located and who is really entitled to the wealth that society produces. So one of the FE's leaders once announced that the philosophy of our union, and again, this was a union that was associated with the Communist Party in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. So one of the FE's leaders once said, the philosophy of our union is that management has no right to exist. And usually that gets, appreciative nods in labor circles. But I actually also think it has serious implications for the kind of organizing you're thinking about doing. It means that the people who think they have the right to tell workers how to do their jobs and how much they are worth are not just oppressive, they're actually superfluous. They are unnecessary. This is a more profound observation, I think, than what we currently hear now, like billionaires should not exist or eat the rich. Those sentiments are rooted in questions of fairness and equity rather than entitlement. So when we were speaking about how grievances can be used, when Jean was talking about how the grievance procedure can be used to organize, I think that's what Jean is trying to get his co-workers to understand, that they are entitled to everything in that shop. And that principle that workers are entitled to not just more, but everything, including the everything that's bound up with everything involved in what is usually referred to as managerial prerogatives, that has organizing implications. From that perspective flows a commitment to organizing as an ongoing and incessant obligation, not just we get a union shop and we're done, right? So that means organizing always, even within a unionized workforce. Organizers with a deep sense of class consciousness rather than just a trade union one, moreover, will understand that expanding rather than restricting membership is key to labor strength. The progress that we've made on this front owes much to the work over a long period of organizers with that kind of radical sense of class consciousness. And I can give a few examples from my work. I'm just going to rush through these because I really feel like I'm taking up too much of people's time. But if you want me to do this, I will go ahead. In the Long Grudge, I have an early chapter about the 1886 general strike, the one that ultimately was about the 8-hour day that ultimately, that led to the Haymarket riot, and the huge McCormick Works plant, which was the first factory in the International Harvester Empire, was central to that conflict. And two organizers feature prominently in the story I tell there. One is the anarchist August Spies, and the other was Miles McPadden, who was a skilled ironworker. And he was a leader in both the Iron Molders Union and the Knights of Labor. Because of the political philosophies that McPadden and Spies embraced, which were revolutionary and utopian, both men pushed beyond the parochial constraints of the predominant craft union ethos of their day to embrace a broader vision of labor solidarity. And that was touched on by a lot of the folks talking today. How we get to that bigger sense of what solidarity means. That's the question that Andrew raised. What does solidarity mean? That's been an ongoing historical debate in the labor movement. So McPadden secures a job in the McCormick Works foundry, and he urges his fellow members of the iron molders local there, who are all, like McPadden, Irish men, to recognize that threats from new technology meant that their skills would no longer be sufficient to preserve their standard of living and their autonomy on the shop floor. Only through the power of collective action, McPadden said, could workers hope to hold their own. So in 1985 and then in 1886, with that general strike, the iron molders, rather than strike by themselves, as had been their custom for decades, joined walkouts of all the workers in the plant. And that was a huge new step. So native-born, highly skilled, white male craftsmen at McCormick Works, for the first time, acted in concert with common laborers, most of them recent immigrants who spoke no English. And these iron molders, again, I want to emphasize, were unionized. They had to recognize that they had something in common with the other workers they saw every day in their plant. McPadden convinced the molders that it was in their own self-interest to join forces with workers with whom they'd previously had no affinity. In doing so, he nudged them away from the clannish independence they had long relied on toward a recognition of their interdependence with the other members of their class. And it's probably worth noting that the iron molders, this concept that management should have no right to exist was not something they would have had a hard time grasping, because skilled artisans had been essentially running McCormick Works since it had first opened before the Civil War. So I'm going to fast forward quickly to 1946, when the Communist Party influenced FE set out to organize International Harvester's newly opened tractor plant in Louisville, Kentucky in 1946. In that segregated city, the then segregated city, the FE could have chosen to focus its attention and tailored its appeals to the white men who would make up the vast majority of the workforce, and blacks would comprise about 15% of the employees there. Given the deep-rooted racism endemic even in the Upper South, that would have been the smart move if winning union recognition was the sole objective. Several other unions were vying for representation at the plant, including the UAW, and their appeals were aimed largely at white workers, with a fair amount of Negro baiting, as the FE saw it, thrown in. But the FE took a starkly different approach, reflected in the two organizers the union assigned to the plant, Vernon Bailey, a white CP member and grizzled veteran of union battles across the country, and Fred Marrero, a young black man already recognized for his outspoken opposition to segregation in Louisville. The bottom line message both men promoted to workers, white and black, was the same. The union would brook no discrimination and would oppose any segregation inside the plant. There was no question that the FE's non-negotiable stance on racial equality, the insistence that workers overcome their prejudice to identify their class interest, stemmed from the union's connection to the Communist Party. Given the time and place that the FE delivered this message, the election results in July 1947 surprised nearly everyone as the FE trounced its opposition. The FE local in Louisville would go on to forge a remarkably deep sense of unity among the black and white workers in the plant. And, this is one of the main sections of my book, how they managed to do that. And I do think that's really relevant to what you all are grappling with today. But I want to circle back to the earlier point that again, that notion that management should have no right to exist, because the orientation of the FE, that radical orientation, led them to seek to instill within the harvester workforce in the mid 20th century the same sense of entitlement about their work that the iron molders in the Gilded Age had felt. So that meant that within the FE, the task of organizing didn't end once recognition had been achieved or a contract was signed. The effort to keep workers agitated and activated remained a constant imperative. FE leaders engaged in daily battles with harvester management over wage rates and plant conditions, most dramatically manifested by the extraordinary number of walkouts at international harvester plants. The regular contests over managerial prerogatives, not incidentally, did much to cement racial unity, as the regular exercise of collective power reminded workers of the strength that came through solidarity. I'm going to stop the formal talk there, but I just want to end because yesterday I was at the No Kings rally and march in Chicago. It was pretty extraordinary. There were anywhere from, depending on the estimate, 100,000 to 250,000 people there. And one of the things that I became aware of at this conference I was at the past weekend, which had leftists and academics who have a lot of labor and left-wing info coming in on their social media feeds, was even though it was how little, and I know we have some Chicagoans here because I saw some of the folks identify themselves in the chat, was even among folks with that kind of knowledge, what's happening in Chicago with this invasion of federal forces, the extreme violence that's being perpetrated in Chicago and even in the surrounding suburbs is really something extraordinary, outrageous, and it's being perpetrated against working people every day in neighborhoods across the city. These ICE agents and the Border Patrol are snatching tamale vendors, parents dropping their kids off at school, workers at Home Depot, violently subduing them. And, this is meeting with, I would say, extraordinary and outstanding resistance from folks across Chicago. But this is being perpetrated against working people, and it's happening every day. And I just have to say, and I'm glad to hear that other folks have said this, Julian and Noah were talking about this. If we want to confront the deep divisions that are undermining working class power, union leaders have to speak out forcefully against what is happening in Chicago and elsewhere. They must speak out forcefully. I'm probably speaking out of turn, saying what I shouldn't say as the historian here. They have to speak out forcefully against the Trump administration. There should be no positive words coming out of Sean Fain's mouth about Donald Trump or the Trump administration or anything they're doing. Every time he does that, he's harming the people in the Latino community here who are in such pain over what is happening in Chicago. It's disappointing, to say the least, to hear Sean Fain say that Donald Trump deserves praise for what is happening at Stellantis, and he's also saying nice things about the new CEO. I don't think any union leader should ever say anything nice about any CEO. And I also don't think that anyone should be fooled into thinking that a change of leadership at the top is really going to make a difference. And I also think it's also important, as folks have acknowledged, that that these new jobs that may be created in the U.S. are coming at the expense of workers internationally, including our Canadian brothers and sisters who are going to be losing jobs, and the chaotic and illogical tariff policy, if it can be called that, of the Trump administration is merely causing damage elsewhere. I'm sure the John Deere workers here can speak to the effects of the tariff policies. So anyway, I shouldn't be talking too much about that. That's not really history.
You're
And
good, Tony.
yeah. And I know there's a lot of work. I mean, to bring this back to your mission, there's a lot of work to do, no doubt, within the UAW membership on this issue, on bridging these divisions, on building true solidarity among workers in the UAW, workers outside the UAW, workers internationally. And I know that's what your mission is, and it's hard work, but that should be UAW's task number one, is reaching its own members and making them understand that the kinds of things that Miles McPadden back in the 19th century understood, the FE leaders in Louisville understood. You don't build solidarity by ignoring those divisions or by thinking you can, talk nice to political leaders and work around it. You have to confront it head on, like you're doing, and like Noah talked about, and figure out ways to make workers understand what solidarity really means. So I'm going to stop. I probably talked too long. Anyway, but I'm
No,
happy
it
to
was great.
engage in any conversations or
Yeah.
discussions about this or other things. And anyway, good luck to everybody. And it's terrific to see everyone here.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
Tony.
much, Tony. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for giving us these words of wisdom. As a worker at John Deere, hearing about the FE never gets old. It keeps my fire burning hot. That is my lineage, and some of those that are here today. Is there anyone? I know Andrew Bergman wants to say something as well, so go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and I can sort of facilitate this Q&A. I did just want to say, yeah, Tony, you're by no means, I think, should you apologize. Like this, I think I can't speak for any organization. We haven't polled everyone, but I think our ethos is very clear that history is political. This is a political organization, and Daily Struggle will be a political publication. So we're going to be debating these things. I think there's very broad agreement. If it's not unanimous, it's something we'll certainly have to debate. But I think it probably is what you said. And I think for us, the idea is that we can't just look at history in this kind of weird, kind of sterile way, which I think is often what's done by many union bureaucrats who talk about things like the stand-up strike, or even the sort of wildcats led by the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which Nolan talked about in our intro, as like something to celebrate. But that is like, oh, okay, yeah, but it just happened. That's nice. And so, yeah, I was just going to say, we actually have an article coming up. It should be out in the next week, called "Trump's Deportations Are an Attack on the Entire Working Class," written by some of the folks here on this call and edited by Glenn and others, that speaks to a lot of these points and talks about what it means to actually engage, in a class struggle union that practices solidarity. And I just to wrap it up before I go to, I think, a couple questions in chat. I mean, yeah, we should talk about what solidarity means, because I think often solidarity means like altruism. I think you really taught a lot of us this in the town hall you came to. Whereas what you talked about in your examples, and I think what Noah and Julian talked about, is a notion of solidarity that's much deeper. And I think the term that many would use on the left is mutual interest, where we actually have our material interests wrapped up together. And so the idea that you would like not organize temps when you're organizing a new shop, or that you would kind of ignore, the immigrant workers in another kind of work, but they're literally in the same building as you or something while you're organizing in a university. It's just absurd, maybe logically, but in a very practical sense, it actually undermines you. And I think your examples speak to that. And that's what solidarity, I think, should mean. So yeah, I see some questions in the chat. As Toni and others said, we're kind of like heading into just like an open conversation now. So folks should feel free to go, feel to stay. I think we'll probably stay on for another 10 or 15 minutes, but probably wrap it up by then. But yeah, very grateful for everyone being here. And I'll start off by reading a question for you in the chat because I was just looking in the chat, Toni, but then other folks can feel free to raise their hand. So Ron asked, and this is actually a really interesting point you got at during our town hall again. Would you say the shop floor steward structure at John Deere still today is the heir to what the FE got set up in AgIMP before it merged with the UAW? It's much better than we have at UAW Ford, as well as much better what we have at GM. And thanks for your book. If you want to respond to that, Toni, and then others should feel free to raise their hand.
Yeah, and not to, I don't want to be repeating myself for folks who either have read the book or were in that earlier discussion, but a large focus of what I wrote about was the contrast between the contracts that the FE negotiated. So those at International Harvester primarily, but also at Deere, Caterpillar, elsewhere, and how they differed from the GM contracts and the Ford contracts. And there were a couple of main areas in which that was true, and that legacy did carry on through for several more for many decades, including up till now. They had much larger steward bodies in FE contracts, sometimes one steward for every 30 workers. They won and maintained, full paid time off for all union stewards at every level of engagement with management. So this left International Harvester and management absolutely fuming all the time about shop stewards who were just kind of roaming the floor, involving themselves in workers' issues. And though there was no strike language in all the FE contracts, just like there always is, for the most part, local and national leaders found ways to ignore that. The walkout levels, as I mentioned, at International Harvester plants, at FE plants were astronomical. I'm talking hundreds of strikes in every plant every year. They would walk out basically, always over. And these were the kinds of grievances that you were talking about earlier. Working conditions, speed up. This was, they would stop work, recognizing that as long as they had the power of the union behind them, as long as they had enough workers engaged, that this was a much more effective remediation than any kind of grievance procedure would allow for. So, and that was a very, sort of a one-on-one comparison between the UAW as led by Walter Reuther, who had made this calculated choice, with a famous Treaty of Detroit in 1950, that what UAW members really wanted were higher wages, good benefits. No question he delivered on those, but that came at the expense of shop floor control. And so that was not the bargain that the FE was willing to enter into. So they got both the better wages and conditions, but kept a much larger share of worker control. And how they managed to do that is, of course, the subject of my book, and the fact that it doesn't have a happy ending for the FE, that ultimately they did lose and have to be absorbed by the UAW, has to do with lots of things like the power of capital and McCarthyism and the labor movement's move to the right, et cetera. So, but absolutely, the difference between the Deere contracts now and the auto contracts stems from that legacy of a different notion, a different concept of what unionism and shop floor representation should look like.
Thanks, Toni. That was really great. Judy, do you want to ask something or say something?
Well, this is just a story from international stuff, which is about 40 years ago in Australia. One of my comrades worked in a mine. On his first day, everybody walked out. And so he had to ask, why are we all walking out? And the steward told him, well, see, there's a new foreman today. So we walk out and show him who's boss. That's it.
Worker control. Does anyone else want to say anything or ask any questions? And sorry if I missed you in the chat. Feel free to repost in the chat. Go for it, Martha.
Yeah, when you said that the workers, the FE members would just stop work when they had a grievance instead of going through this whole grievance procedure, did they stop work and stay in the plant, or did they stop work and walk out, or was it some of both?
It was some of both. And it would depend. It wasn't always the entire plant, but obviously, as you all know, some departments are key to whether or not the rest of the plant is operating. So it would sometimes be just the sheet metal workers, or just could be a group of 10 workers that would stop, and they would have to address that. And sometimes they just milled around in the locker room until they had a settlement. Sometimes they would actually, leave the plant. Sometimes it would just be that group of workers. Sometimes it was the whole plant that would walk out. Sometimes they walked out. I mean, one of the anecdotes I have about the Louisville plant is a walkout of the entire plant when the company fired two of the more aggressive shop stewards. Those two shop stewards happened to be Black, and the entire workforce walked out to protest the firing of those two stewards, which was such an extraordinary event. And again, then this is in 1948. This was such an unprecedented event in then segregated Louisville that the Louisville Defender, the Black newspaper in the town, reported on this happening, and eventually, and so that it wasn't just about individual workers who felt aggrieved over, a speed up or a plant safety issue, but it was also about protecting their representatives, using that power on the shop floor to ensure that their representatives were protected. And so again, that kind of cross-racial solidarity that local managed to build in a place where, if there were ever a group of, these were dyed-in-the-wool racists, many of these white workers who came to work in that plant, and how a union at that time managed to build such a cohesive local is really something that I think can be learned from today.
Yeah, and I think you're making me think, Toni, like we have to. I mean, you just gave some very nuanced examples. There actually are, like Gene Duchemin, like other people here have very nuanced examples, and I've seen them. Nevina, who's here, is a committee person, like these really specific moments where something happened. There's kind of just an expression of militancy and control, basically. It might have been much more common a century ago or decades ago, but it still happens. And I think what we need to do is open up. I think Daily Struggle needs to be doing this, and maybe we can work with you a little on how to illuminate some of these stories. But we have to be able to talk about it in kind of enough detail. It can't get, if it's 30 pages, no one will read it. But you have to actually be able to imagine that it could happen in your shop, because it does. It happens all the time. But somehow it's also pretty unimaginable. Like, oh, we're not going to stop working. And usually it's not that simple. It's something much more complex that leads to it, and people are prepared. And it's probably a slowdown or a work to rule these days, not a stoppage. But if you go back to the 30s, it sounds like it might have just been people leaving the shop floor and going somewhere else. But it's unimaginable these days. Like people are like, how? So I think we have to like learn how to express that in enough detail that people understand that they can do it too, in a way that seems accessible. It'll still be hard. We can't make it seem simple because it's not, but possible, I guess. I don't know if you have experience doing that from your stories that you gather.
Well, one of the things that people talked about at this conference I was at last weekend, I mean, when the union leaders or organizers and the historians kind of got together and were really having a conversation, was how those individual anecdotes, those stories about, so somebody from the teachers union was talking about some of the divisions between Latino workers and Black workers in the CTU, and how they work on those things. So the actual not just saying, so we work on them or we try to get people to understand each other or, but what are the actual things that you say in those conversations that work? What is effective? And so I think it was Noah was talking about, speaking to someone who politically he has nothing in common with, but there was a particular incident he was talking about using it was hot in the workplace and that he was, agitating to get fans there, and that helped this fellow understand the importance of, I think that I could be mischaracterizing that anecdote, but I believe that's what he said. So, certain things, it's not, we often talk, and, I'm as guilty of it as anybody in these sort of generalities about we need to work together. We need to build solidarity. We need to understand that we're all, in one class. But to the extent that you can, actually get into these, what actually works effectively, and to recognize that, that those can help, whether they're plucked from history or from somebody who's in a shop down the street. This is the kind of argument I use that actually seemed to sway people, is can be really useful, it seems to me. I mean, I love to tell this one anecdote that's sort of similar to what Noah was about in the Louisville local. Not only did the FE try to build racial solidarity in the plant, they also went out into the community and were trying to break down a lot of the segregation barriers in the parks and in the hotels, and there was this band of white and black workers, FE members, who would go out and go to the hotels or go to the parks and try to integrate, just show up and try to integrate them. And one of the black leaders of the FE local talked about this fellow, Thomas Pearl, who always came with them. And Thomas Pearl was, as at least according to the black leader, as racist as they came, young guy. But they were usually getting into altercations with the police in these attempts to integrate the parks or the hotels. The Louisville police would show up. And Thomas Pearl just loved getting into fights, and he loved especially getting into fights with the police. So they were happy to have him come along, regardless and he became sort of integrated into he became a really tough union steward, and I presume over the years his views on race evolved. But they were happy to have him come because he was really good at roughing it up with the cops. So you sort of, like the classic thing, you meet people where they are, right, and then you pull them along. But actually things like that, it made me, it was amusing, but it was also like true, like it made sense to me. So, but
Yeah, and I
again,
think
I think those specific, what are the specific arguments? What are the circumstances that you actually engaged with someone in your shop, in your workplace, on the campus, that got somebody into the union, that got somebody to change their perspective on immigrant workers, or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, and I think for all, whether it's like legal services, higher ed, on the shop floor in a manufacturing facility, like something happens materially, like something actually happens to someone and they're pissed, or it motivates them. And I mean, I think everyone here has organized, in my shop, the ham rank and file team, that's what we call our little rank and file group. It's small, it's, new. We haven't been around for like a year and a half, but it's not, some of us are socialists. A lot of the people are probably not, voting Democrat, maybe more liberal oriented. And then there's a few Trump voters. They're not like diehard, like, Trump or die, but they voted for Trump, and we're brought together by the experiences on the floor, and it's just kind of obvious. It's not that we're not talking about politics either. We're talking about it. We just have some disagreements, but then in some very direct way with how we interact with our bosses, we're very cohered. Okay, there's a few people who have said stuff in chat that's very cool. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to get off me and say, or has any other questions, but I'll leave it for another, like, 10, 20 seconds. And if no one else has anything they want to say, I'll hand it back to Nolan to close us out.
I'll say one more thing, and just in closing, if I could.
Yeah, let's see. Judy, you want to say something,
Oh.
and then we'll let Tony go before we hand it back to Nolan?
Yes, real quickly, what the single payer movement has is the phrase everybody in, nobody out. And that actually does resonate with people I have seen. Thanks. I'm out.
Go for it, Tony.
Yeah, I was just going to say in the 1930s, a lot of the CIO unions that were organizing and again up against, you know, incredibly powerful corporations and all kinds of resistance. And one of the things that was certainly true in the International Harvester plants I've looked at, sure it was true in Ford and General Motors, that it wasn't that the move into unionism for a lot of individual workers, especially younger ones, didn't come because they personally felt I need more money. I need, I mean, obviously they did. I need more safety on the job. It was because of what they saw happening to older workers, to the workers who were being fired summarily after being there for 20 or 30 years. And that unfairness was, and it wasn't, again, it was not, it was a sense of selflessness. It was a sense of connection, of community, of solidarity, was what pushed many of the younger workers who were coming into those plants in the 30s towards unionism. And that's, that's also an inspiring thing to recognize in history, that those unions that were built in the 1930s, that including the UAW, that became the foundation for the labor movement we now know, were built by a lot of people who took a real tremendous step, courageous step. They were, putting everything they had on the line for someone else, for somebody who, where they were standing up and saying, it's not fair that you're firing this 55-year-old man who's been here for, for this long. So again, I think those kinds of historical examples can be inspiring to people, but also instructional.
Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our intro speakers, Sophia, Rob, and Jean, to those who have facilitated, Andrew, myself, Martha, Julian, Noah. Thank you especially to those who have helped show up here today, celebrate this launch with us, and donate to our fights. Thank you to the members of our editorial board. We have Ali Stanton as our art director alongside Nevada Filipovich Wangler. I apologize. Also, we have Andrew Bergman, Chuck Gelman, Gene Bay, Judy Raitt, Julian, Martha Grevatt, Noah, myself, Rob Lett, and Tori Rimberg. Thank you, everyone, for the work it's taken to get us to this point. It's been a long time coming. We're here. Let's go ahead and celebrate this victory. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.